I'm Ken Gilman, a Cleft Life director, and I'm accompanied today by my good friend, my mandola. And the topic is the obbligato instrument and its inclusion in worship. In orchestral music, obbligato is described as a solo part that stands out, not to the level of someone who stands in front of the orchestra, but as something that is included and stands out a little bit within a performance. So in the liturgical format, we generally consider it as something that's somewhat independent of the line of the song, and it might be reinforcing the melody, or it might be a counter melody or a descant, instrumental descant type thing, or that kind of thing. But it's something that I refer to as the condiments of the liturgical ensemble. Not crucial, but often add some energy or some sparkle or that added element, like salt or pepper might add to a dish. So the instruments that I've seen successfully used in my own directing experience include violins, flutes, recorders, mandolins, oboes, bassoons, clarinets, penny whistles, cellos, bouzouki, mandolas, violas, harmonicas, banjos, harps, guitars, violas, mandocellos. There are options here. The only one I have not seen used successfully are bagpipes. So adding on obbligato instruments to your ensemble, there are people out in the assembly who have played instruments from childhood. They've played flutes or clarinets in band, or they played violin or viola or cello or things like that in orchestra growing up, even trumpets and French horns and things like that. Often the more exotic instruments require more regular use in order to be in good form, maintaining your embouchure and things like that. But talking to people about things they have played that could be an option to include can greatly enrich the sonic spread of the ensemble and make things, to my way of thinking, more interesting. So one of the challenges to sometimes deal with is that people who are well trained classically, or as one of my favorite violin players said, I'm well paper trained, is that you don't get a lot of training in actual ensemble stuff. I started on violin when I was 10 and never had a discussion of music theory or how to connect with other people or play an ensemble until I was actually college age. And the classically trained person is trained to play the right note at the right time, at the right pitch, and not to deviate from that, because everybody else is doing the same thing, and the only person entitled to creative expression is the conductor. And so any creativity is more likely to screw things up than create the overall sound in an orchestra, for example. An ensemble is different, and so people who have played in bands, for example, in small ensembles, you get exposed to listening to each other and actually getting in a place where you're playing off each other and hearing where somebody else is playing and moving into a little different register on your own instrument to fill out the sound, as opposed to cover each other up and sound muddier on those kinds of things. So my very first experience actually in tight ensemble was in St. Anthony's Parish in Bryan, Texas, where two guitars backing up the cantor, and I was the mandolin and fiddle player, and 2 hours of rehearsing every Wednesday night to play at the 6 o'clock Mass on Sunday. And that was the first time I'd been expected to not play what was written, but to play in conversation with other instrumentalists. And that was an eye-opening and delightful experience for me. It was the beginning of the trend. So, ensemble is a mentality, and engaging people and pulling them in is important. And this happens in conversations with people about, but sometimes people will come up and volunteer, and that's lovely. And sometimes you have to kind of track them down, chase them down, convince them that they need to do it. Special occasions are often an opportunity. I've had people had promised to play. I got my favorite violist, for example, because she promised to play at her friend's wedding. The friend was a violinist in my ensemble, and so she came and played in the ensemble for Maria's wedding, and then lo and behold, she enjoyed herself so much that she just became a part of the 9 o'clock ensemble at St. Michael's. So, there's an opportunity to pull people in. I've also had the experience of getting people who pulled out the violin that was in the closet and hadn't been touched for 40 years and thought, well, geez, maybe I should get back into it. Things were a little on the rough side. The tone quality wasn't there, and the ability to hit pitches reliably was not there, and those kind of things. And so what I would do is include people in rehearsals and have them play for a month or longer, depending on how long it took for them to kind of get their chops back, and then begin to include them on Sunday morning without a microphone until they were ready to be on a microphone. But sometimes you have to deal with, my choir is infested with pathologically nice people who are all about inclusion and community and are not paying attention to standards necessarily. And so had a fellow whose violin skills were not ready for prime time yet, but lovely person who was prepared to be engaged. And so the people in the choir say, as we come up to our big Christmas Eve service, well, you're going to play on Christmas Eve, aren't you? And so he kind of came up to me afterwards, and I started off the conversation by, I'm not quite ready to have you do that yet. And he said, yeah, that's kind of what I thought too. And in his case, what we did, because there was a pretty good chance he was never going to get ready, and so we got him a bass guitar and worked with him on bass guitar for a while, and those were chops that his musical skills lined him up to be prepared to be a genuine addition and not a distraction. So those are some thoughts about the way to expand your sonic range with some different instrumentation that blends in and helps and not distracts. That's kind of the key element. Go Obbligato.